Shalom Aleichem to everyone. So I know that Aryeh is coming, he's not here yet. Zat Hashem is coming. And Katie is away, so it's me and my Facebook friends and the wonderful people that are watching with me. I see Zahava is watching and other people, but I can't see who, so Shalom Aleichem to you. And of course, to my mother. Next week, by the miracle of modern technology, I will be transported to Miami. Oh, to Yael, of course, Yael is there. To South Florida. And I'm planning on giving the lesson the same time as now, Bezat Hashem, from my mother's home in Plantation, Florida. So that's going to be quite exciting for me and my mother, and Bezat Hashem. Okay, just a second. I should have cleaned my glasses before I started. So we're continuing now in the lesson that we've been learning, part 2 of the Likutey Moharan. This is lesson 71, and we've been learning it for 2 weeks now. And I'm planning on finishing it tonight, Bezat Hashem. It might be a little bit speeding things up towards the end, because it's quite long. Like if I go to the end of the section here, it's like this many pages, which is a bit more than I usually do in a normal class, but I think we'll be okay, especially since nobody's really asking me questions. So here we go. Okay, just to review, there is a review here in the footnotes. This is a review. So we're talking about the mentalities of the land of Israel and the mentalities of Chutz La'aretz, of the diaspora. And just to clarify, there's Aryeh, Shalom Aleichem. You can do your regular trip if you need. Okay. Welcome, Aryeh. Nice to I said that hopefully Aryeh's coming. Bezat Hashem. Katie just wrote to me, said she's not coming. And then we have people watching online. Okay, so Bezat Hashem, and next week I'm in Miami.
Next week?
Yeah, so I'll do it on Facebook, just like this. I'm planning on bringing the stand, maybe rent a guitar for a day or two. We'll see. But definitely going to be learning same time. Bezat Hashem. Okay, so I'm just reviewing the lesson. We have the mentalities of the land of Israel and the mentalities of the diaspora. And I wanted to clarify that Rabbi Nachman says that the mentalities of the land of Israel generate harmony and peace. And the mentalities of the diaspora is a sign of blemished glory and generate conflict and discord. So you can easily misunderstand what he's trying to say. It's kind of like saying, so the people living in the land of Israel, you're all peaceful, and those of us living outside of Israel, we're fighting with each other all the time. And of course, that's not his intention. First of all, Rabbi Nachman was living outside of the land of Israel. So he's talking about himself. And he wrote this, if you remember, when we started 2 weeks ago, he was talking about there was a group of 300 families that moved here to the land of Israel with Reb Chaim of Vitebsk, who was the top student of the Maggid of Mezrich, who was the successor of the Baal Shem Tov. So basically, the number 2 big Hasidic Rebbe moved to Israel, moved to Jerusalem with 300 of the Hasidim. He died 11 years later in 1788, and he came with, who was it that he came with? Kalisker, I think was his name. Rabbi Avraham Kalisker. Where is it? Somewhere towards the end here. I just want to get his name. Yeah, Rabbi Avraham Kalisker, who took over for him. And, this was the famous, the Alter Rebbe who was raising money and ended up being put in prison and released, and the whole Hasidic holiday that we have every year. All of that is related. So there was this strife between all of these Hasidic leaders about giving money to the land of Israel. So he's saying, the Jews in the land of Israel, they kind of got it together. They're not fighting with one another. But we here in Chutz La'aretz, all of us big Rebbes, we're all fighting with one another. He also talks about the Jerusalem Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud. And he says in the Jerusalem Talmud, everybody is working kind of as a team, kind of like a research team, to come to a conclusion. In the Babylonian Talmud, everybody's trying to argue with one another. An argument is strife. So that's what he means when he says there's the land of Israel and there's the diaspora. And but he did say in the beginning, so you would think that in the land of Israel, really everyone would get along, but also in the land of Israel, people fight with each other, which we'll get to. We're going to finish the lesson today, and at the end, he's going to explain that. So that's where we started, and now when we're talking about Hashem's glory, we're saying Hashem, realizing Hashem's presence in the world. I was translating Gal Ori, like Reb Shalom used to do, a wave of my light. So the blemish mentalities of the diaspora are fixed when supernal pleasantness flows and reveals God's glory. So we talked about Noam Elyon, supernal pleasantness, which is, you could say, that warm, cuddly feeling that you have when you feel completely connected to Hashem. So hopefully, during davening, on Shabbos, certain times of the day, you feel a complete connection with Hashem. And whatever's going on in our brains, that, whatever chemicals are being released at that moment, that's called Noam Elyon. It's kind of like that connection with us and Hashem in that special place is Noam Elyon. And that's where the abundance comes down. And that's how we get to the point where we see Hashem's presence in the world. We don't see it when we're busy at work or we're in the shuk and people are pushing us around. We see it when we have that moment that we can connect with Hashem and understand that Hashem is running the world. So why was the world created? The world was created for Hashem's glory. And that's why I translate glory as Hashem, as kind of creating this world where Hashem is hidden, and our job is to reveal Hashem's presence in the world. Otherwise, Hashem just needed it so that we could worship Him, bow down, and bring gifts to Him all the time. That seems like a stupid thing. Why would the force of all reality need that? So now, why did Hashem create a world where He's hidden and create us that we have to figure out that He's there? That's already beyond my intelligence. I don't understand. Then he talked about the great tzaddikim, and that they know that any honor that they receive, so glory was coming from kavod, any honor that they receive, or anyone who's like giving them credit, like somebody would give Hashem, you did a miracle. I'm going to have a story at the end of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, another story of the Lubavitcher Rebbe doing a miracle, and people would say, oh, it's the Rebbe, and the Rebbe knows better than to say, yeah, it's me, I'm a tzaddik, so of course I did it. The Rebbe says everything's from Hashem, and the Rebbe, a true tzaddik, knows that everything is Hashem, and deflects any honor coming to them and redirects it towards Hashem. And they can even know which level of God's speech brought this revelation of Hashem into the world. And through this, they magnify and exalt Hashem's presence in the world. And it takes great inner strength, koach, to ensure that all of Hashem's presence in the world is redirected towards Hashem and not taken for yourself. And exercising the strength reveals the chaf chet letters of the act of creation, the 28 letters of creation, which is koach, in the 10 utterances through which the world was created. So that's where we left off. Now we're continuing in the middle, and I'm watching the clock, and Bezrat Hashem, by 8:50, Bezrat Hashem will be finished, unless you have a lot of questions. V'ikar kavod shel Hashem yitbarach nitgale rak al yedei ha'adam. How is Hashem's, that we did last week, how is Hashem's presence revealed in the world? It's only revealed through human beings, which is what I was saying before, that was the purpose that Hashem created the world, so that we could reveal His presence in the world. So now we're going to part 6. V'da ki mochin shel Eretz Yisrael hem b'chinat noam. That's what I was saying before, that the mentality of the land of Israel is connected to pleasantness. V'mochin shel chutz la'aretz hem b'chinat chovlim. And the mentality of the outside of the land of Israel are damagers, like Chabala, which is a terrorist, mechabel. But he's not saying that people that live in Chutz La'aretz, meaning himself, are terrorists. He's saying that you have the ability in the land of Israel to be on a higher level, connected to Hashem, and reveal Hashem's presence in a way that you can't outside of the land of Israel. And so the work for outside the land of Israel is to try to come as close as you can to seeing Hashem's presence all the time. Kamo shekatuv, le'achad karati noam, u'le'achad karati chovlim. So now he's giving a proof text from Zechariah. One of them I called peaceful or pleasantness, and the other one I called damagers. The sages of blessed memory said, Noam elu talmidei chachamim shebe'eretz Yisrael. When it says, I called one of them pleasant, that's talking about the scholars in the land of Israel, the Torah scholars in the land of Israel. Sheman'imim ze leze ba'alacha, that they are pleasant towards one another when it comes to halacha. Chovlim, damagers, elu talmidei chachamim shebechutz la'aretz. These are the Torah scholars outside of the land of Israel. Shechovlim ze leze ba'alacha. They assault one another when they're discussing halacha. So that's what I was saying. It wasn't literal. It was just the attitude that they had. And I think what he's trying to say is that attitude comes about by either being in the land of Israel or not. So when a person is on a high spiritual level, we're talking about the scholars that compiled the Gemara, the two Gemaras. So these are great tzaddikim. They are plugged into the spiritual energy of the land of Israel, and they can feel this Noam and Yom. When you're outside the land of Israel, you don't have that. It's just like, you just don't have it. You know, somebody is born with a talent, somebody is not. The person that's not can try as much as they want. They will never reach the level of the person that has the talent. For example, in art, you know, you've seen people make incredible drawings. It just comes to them naturally. No matter how hard I tried, I would never be able to do what they have. It's the same thing here. V'ikar ha'holada u al yedei. So I'm skipping a lot of notes here. The light's bothering you? Yeah, the table is over here a little bit. Okay, so we were talking about the Torah scholars, which I did explain. Okay. V'ikar ha'olada u al yedei b'chinat noam and yom. And offspring, so now offspring, here he talks about in two levels. He talks about literal offspring, that basically later on in the lesson he says, we talked about having kids before, but not just having kids, but having kids that you raise to understand that Hashem is running the world. It's not just enough to procreate. You have to raise your children with an awareness of Hashem's presence. But it also, the holada also comes about through tzedakah, through giving tzedakah, which he's going to talk about in a little bit. So we're calling it offspring for now, but it has two meanings. And the main thing regarding the offspring is connect al yedei b'chinat noam elyon, is making this connection with the supernal pleasantness, which it means that we see Hashem's presence in the world and we acknowledge it. Ki minoam elyon nitorim shal hovim derich muta. Did I say that? Dir chimuta. Flames of love. That's what that means. So by bringing about this offspring, and the offspring is first of all children, and the offspring is really having an open heart and helping other people, that arouses flames of love for Hashem, asher al yadam ba ha'holada, that through them comes about the offspring. Regarding the flames of love, the Zohar says that the flames of love descend each Friday afternoon to burn away the klipot, meaning the negative energy from the week, so that these evil forces have no presence on Shabbos. Right? We learned a lesson a long time ago that all of the mitzvot that we do during the week are elevated on Shabbos, mainly through the eating on Shabbos, through the oneg on Shabbos. And the whole week they're just waiting and waiting and waiting to go up. And so here he's saying that this flames of love come and burn away that evil energy, and this is symbolized by the Shabbat candles. These flames of love kindle great affection and passion between husband and wife. And Friday night being a time of marital relations in the Shulchan Aruch. So that's also related to love and passion. But the candles on Friday night are supposed to bring peace in the home. The source of this love is da'at, rooted in bina, i.e. supernal pleasantness. What he's saying there is that where is this love coming from? It's when you are aware of Hashem's presence and you really get it, then you have this level of flames of love for Hashem. When Noam Elyon is flowing, the holy passion it engenders leads to the begetting of offspring whose awareness of God magnifies His glory in the world. Which the begetting of offspring is literally, and also being able to give tzedakah with an open heart. B'bchinat, now he's bringing a text proof. Na'amta li ma'od niflata ahavatecha ki me'ahavat nashim. So now he's saying, this is from Shmuel. Your love, you were most pleasing to me, and your love was more wonderful to me than the love of any woman. And this is David talking about Yonatan's death. So I grieve for you, my brother Yonatan, na'amta. You were most pleasing to me. Your love was more wonderful to me than woman's love. King David said this when lamenting Yonatan's death. He recalled in amazement that Yonatan's platonic love, see, they made sure to put that in there, platonic love for him had been stronger than a man's love for a woman, or alternatively, stronger than the love which David's own wives felt for him. Now that's a good one. In the context of her lesson, this proof text shows the connection between love and Noam, and that's why I brought it. Okay. Al yedei Noam ha'elyon mitorer ha'ava. So when you have this connection with Hashem, it arouses a love, b'chinat shalhovim derichimuta, flames of love, she'al yadam ha'holada, that through them comes about the begetting of offspring. Okay, continuing. V'noam ha'elyon shofea tamid. This supernal pleasantness is always there. It's flowing down always. Avan tzichim kli lekabel al yedo shefa noam elyon. But you have to have a vessel to receive this abundance that's coming down. V'da she'al yedei tzedakah naaseh hakli lekabel al yeda minoam elyon shal hovim derichimuta. How does this come about? It comes about through tzedakah. Tzedakah is the vessel through which the supernal pleasantness is received and the flames of love are created. How is it? Flames of love, yes. Ki tzedakah hi nedivut lev, because tzedakah is the generosity of the heart. Kamo shekatuv, and I was bringing a text proof, me'et kol ish asher yidvenu libo tikhu et trumati. This is from Sefer Shemot. Each person should donate according to what their heart wants and you should make a donation. This was for the Mishkan. Nitvut halev, and the generosity of the heart, hainu sheniftach v'nitnadev halev. That is, that the heart opens up and wants to give. She'al yedei zeh niftachin shvilin deliba. That through this, paths to the heart are opened up. So we've talked about tzedakah, that even though it's such a great mitzvah, you don't give tzedakah. And the way, if you open your hands like this, it opens your heart. Like you can feel it. If you really open your hand wide, you can feel there's a connection with your heart. This is one of the things that Reb Shalom used to talk about. It's like one of his favorite things. He liked all these hippie stuff. So, and it means that when you're giving tzedakah, don't be a kamtzan, don't be a miser. Open your hand and give as much as you can. I remember reading a story about a wealthy chassid that had 2 boxes, basically, when people would come for tzedakah. He had a safe with all these boxes, and he would pull them out whenever they ran out. And depending on what the person needed, one would be full of certain denomination of coins. Is that how you say denomination of coins? Not just religion, okay. And another would be bills. And so the person would say, I need this, I need that. He would give him the box, and he would say, take as much as you need. And that's really the generosity of the heart. Like not saying, well, I'm going to decide that you need this much, so you're going to get this. It's somebody who was really able to say, I have so much, take as much as you need. By the way, I have a friend who's very wealthy, and on Purim every year, he goes to the bank and takes out thousands of shekels in 1 shekel coins. He tells me he has to start months in advance because the banks don't want to give him. So you can see he's preparing for Purim months in advance. And he has this big bag. And when people come around and ask for tzedakah, in the morning for shachrit, he shows them the bag. He says, only whatever your hands can take. So they'll go and they'll take as much as they can. You can see the joy on their face. They're so excited. I mean, it really could be like 200 shekels or something that they're pulling out of there, 150. But it's just this little game of his, here's this huge sack of thousands of shekels of 1 shekel coins. And people take it and they stick it in their pockets and stick it in their coat. There's something very special about that. Okay, l'chaim. Let's continue. Say hi to Jesse, who's joining us. Shalom aleichem. Okay, me'et kol ish, right? Everybody give according to your heart. Hainu, sheniftach, right? We said shvilim deliba, pathways to the heart. Shenasim kli lekabel shalhovim derichimuta, that you create a vessel in order to receive the flames of love from Hashem. Shenim shechim me'noam helyon kanam, that come about through when you feel this connection with Hashem, as mentioned above. He's going to talk about tzedakah in just a minute. Okay. V'yesh tzedakah shel Eretz Yisrael, v'yesh tzedakah shel chutz la'aretz. There's the level of tzedakah of the land of Israel, and there's the level of tzedakah of the diaspora. And as we know, when you're giving tzedakah, the poor person, more than the poor person receives, the person who gives gets, meaning that you would think, okay, I'm giving thousands of shekels maybe to somebody who's poor, and I'm really helping them, but really, the person who's giving the money is receiving more than the person who's getting the money. And that's an important thing to remember. V'ikar, so the land of Israel, he's saying there's tzedakah of the land of Israel and the tzedakah of the diaspora. This section of the Shulchan Aruch talks about the charity details, details the priorities of giving. Destitute family members come first. So this is really important. You know, I don't know if it's called a living will. I don't know what it's called. But I wrote one of these for my family. That you like write all the things that you want your family to remember, like kind of like guidelines for life. So one of the things I wrote for my kids is that they remember to always ask their siblings for if they need tzedakah first. Like if you're giving your daily few shekels here and there, that's one thing. But if you have like a big chunk of money and a few thousand shekels or something like that, and you want to give tzedakah, you should ask your poor family members first. And since you might not know if somebody is poor or not, you should ask all your family members. So it's something that you don't think about. I know my wife and I have been through many difficult periods where we really had like nothing. And family members did help us out a lot, but they didn't ask us. We had to ask for it. And so here it's saying that you need to ask them. Charity monies should be distributed locally rather than sent out of town. So the way it works is first you give it to people who are there, and then you go further and further out. But you start with the people who live in the land of Israel. They take precedence over those in the diaspora. So if you're living in New York, and you have a relative living in the land of Israel, even though you'd like to give tzedakah to your brother in New York, you give it to your brother in the land of Israel first. That always is the priority. And within the land of Israel, Jerusalem is the beginning. So like the poorest of the poor of the poor starts in Jerusalem and then works its way back out. It's an important thing to know. Hopefully, nobody in our families will need tzedakah. We'll be able to always be giving tzedakah. B'ezrat Hashem. I was once blessed by this homeless person that asked for money, and I gave her some money, and she said, "You should always be blessed to give and not have to receive." But I guess she wasn't sticking because the bracha didn't come true. Okay. Reb Nassan wrote that a person should not only give charity, but should also do their utmost to get others to give, especially those living in the land of Israel. The subject of charity is discussed in detail, and they have another book about it. Okay. That was just an important footnote there. V'ikar hu tzedakah shel Eretz Yisrael, she'al yada na'aseh kli lekabel minoam anyon. So it's good to give tzedakah outside of the land of Israel, but you want to really receive this noam anyon, try to give tzedakah within the land of Israel. Earlier, the Rebbe linked the land of Israel mentalities with pleasantness, and having just explained that charity creates a vessel in the heart for receiving the flames of love from supernal pleasantness, the Rebbe specifies that it is giving to the poor of the Holy Land which accomplishes this. So we get to do that all the time here. People just come to us. Although giving charity to the diaspora's poor also requires that a person have an open heart, and so also creates a vessel for receiving from supernal pleasantness, that person's bond to the land of Israel mentalities is not as strong. This can be understood from another of the Rebbe's lessons, which teaches that by giving charity to the land of Israel, one becomes included in the air of the Holy Land. The Bi'or HaLikutim, adds that it is axiomatic. What is axiomatic? Do you know?
What's the context?
That the higher the quality of the charity one gives, the higher the quality of the mentalities one receives. Okay, so they're connected. They're connected to one another. In short, the Land of Israel charity begets Land of Israel mochin. So you give charity in the Land of Israel, and you get this connection with the Land of Israel, and you get the mentality, meaning that your awareness of Hashem's presence in the world comes on the level of the Land of Israel and not the diaspora, by giving tzedakah to Jews in the Land of Israel. And this is what brings about the offspring, the birthing, which we talked about before, meaning bringing Hashem's presence. The holadah is bringing Hashem's presence into the world. So now he's giving another proof text. So for you tzedakah, ki ikar holadah u al yedei tzedakah kana, because the main thing is coming about through tzedakah. V'zeh b'chinat eile toldot Yaakov Yosef, that these are the offspring of Yaakov Yosef. Hainu she'ikar. That's from Bereshit. That I think we're reading this toldot. It's coming up next Shabbos, right? Eile toldot Yaakov Yosef. I don't know. I just guessed these things, and I figured toldot is next week. This is Chayei Sarah. This Shabbos, next Shabbos is toldot. Hainu she'ikar ha'oladah. That is bringing about offspring, and creating this connection with Hashem, al yedei Yaakov Yosef. It comes through Yaakov Yosef. Ki Yaakov hu b'chinat tzedakah. Yaakov is connected to tzedakah. Kamo shekatuv mishpat u'tzedakah b'Yaakov ata'asita. That judgment and justice came about through Yaakov. V'ikar ha'oladah. And this creating this offspring, al yedei tzedakah, comes about through tzedakah, as mentioned above. Kanal. Shehi akli lekabel hashpa'at noam elyon kanal. How are you going to receive this supernal pleasantness? You do it by giving tzedakah. V'Yosef b'chinat noam, and Yosef is connected to pleasantness, kamoshe mevoar lekaman, as it will be explained further on. Al yedei ha'oladah dahainu shenoladim v'ne'obim b'nei adam. So now he's talking about literally, by giving birth to children, by bringing about more kids in the world. Al yedei zeh nitgale kvodo yitbarach beyoter kanal. Then we can reveal Hashem's presence more in the world. V'zeh b'chinat kol zera Yaakov kabduhu. That all of the offspring of Yaakov honor or glorify Hashem. But really what it means is all of the offspring of Yaakov, meaning us, all of the Jewish people, our job is to reveal Hashem's presence in the world. By seeing Hashem's presence in the world. By having an open heart, by helping our fellow Jews, and by having emunah, and by having faith, and knowing that everything comes from Hashem. Ki al yedei ha'oladah na'aseh al yedei b'chinat Yaakov. Through the offspring comes about through Yaakov. Shu b'chinat tzedakah, who's connected to tzedakah, as mentioned above, kanal, ve'al yedei zeh kabduhun. Through this, we reveal Hashem's presence in the world. Ki al yedei zeh nitrabe kvodo yitbarach kanal, because through this, Hashem's presence is revealed in the world. So just to summarize that, first we had the idea of giving tzedakah. You could also say that being a parent is in a sense the ultimate form of tzedakah. You don't just give all the money that you have, everything that you have. You give your entire soul, and you're exhausted at 3 a.m. and your kid throws up. You're the one who gets up and cleans up the kid and cleans up the floor and does everything and goes back to sleep. I wouldn't do that for anyone. If my friend called me at 3 a.m, he said, "Hey man, I'm drunk, I just threw up," and I'd call me in the morning. But my kids, you give everything. That's the ultimate. It's the ultimate way of connecting with Hashem. There's nothing that can ever push you that hard than having children, and it's endless. I don't know. I'll have to ask my parents. They probably would say, you're 50 years old and we're still helping you out, or something like that. But when it comes to little kids, it's muvan me'elav. It's completely automatically understood that who's going to take care of your kids? You are. And by taking care of these kids, first of all, you have to have emunah. You don't have emunah, you can't even understand how to be a parent. And you have to have a huge, generous, open heart for your children. And thank God, Hashem created things in such a way that even though your kids can make you crazy at times, ultimately you always love them. The love is always there. It's a love that never goes away. ואזי כששופע הנועם עליון על ידי הכלי שנעשה על ידי צדקה בשביל ההודדה כנ"ל, so then when this flow of this noam elyon, this supernal pleasantness comes down, so when you're like in the flow, you're feeling the connection with Hashem. And how does it come about? It comes about through the tzedakah, and the tzedakah brings this presence into the world. וגם בחינת הנועם עליון, שהוא מוכין, מקבל ונשפע עוד מלמעלה יותר. So when you get this mentality, you get this, it's a mochin, but it's this state of mind of being connected to Hashem, then it draws down even more of the feeling of being connected to Hashem. Kind of like mitzvah goreh with mitzvah, and also the other way, chas v'shalom. Ki yadua, as it's known, azai elu hamochin shel chutz la'aretz, shehem b'chinat chovlim, shehem noflim, gam ken be'elu hamochin shel Eretz Yisrael. That the mentality of the land of the diaspora, which is a mentality that he calls chovlim, damagers, but really it's a mentality or a state of mind is a better way of saying it, a state of mind that doesn't have that high connection like you have in the land of Israel. It falls into the category of the state of mind of the land of Israel, because everything is connected to the land of Israel. And whatever mentality, state of mind a Jew has outside of the land of Israel, it's still connected to the land of Israel. Shehem b'chinat noam. And the state of mind of the land of Israel is pleasantness. Kedei letaken, lihitaken al yedei zeh, ki az huzman tikunam shel elu hamochim shel chutz la'aretz. In order to be fixed through this, because this is the time when the state of mind of the diaspora can be fixed. So I think what he's trying to say here, let me see if I finish the paragraph and it's clearer to me. Yeah, let's finish the paragraph. Ki ikar pagam v'kinkul hamochim shel chutz la'aretz hu al yedei pagam hakvod. Because the blemish and the screwing up, I guess, in a way, of the state of mind of the diaspora comes about through a disconnect in seeing Hashem's presence in the world when you're in the diaspora. And as a result of this, they're not able to draw sustenance from the state of mind of the land of Israel. And then they literally turn into the state of mind of somebody in the diaspora. And this is what messes them up, as mentioned above. Okay, so there's a few things I want to say here. First of all, he's saying that everything's connected to the state of mind of the land of Israel, and that how do you fix the mentality of the diaspora? You fix it by working on being more connected to the state of mind. I should continue to say state of mind of the land of Israel, because what happens when you're in the diaspora, and I'll give you a practical example of this in just a second, is that you don't have the same connection. You can't have the same connection. It's one of the reasons that I'm dreading leaving Israel, because I feel the connection most of the time. I definitely feel it when I'm davening, and I don't feel it when I'm outside of the land of Israel. I didn't understand that till I learned this lesson, but now I do, and I kind of feel like I have to get back to that land of Israel state of mind because it's so lacking. So you were in the States just now. I don't know, maybe if you felt it, or maybe you didn't. Maybe you're so involved in nature you didn't realize that you were in the diaspora. I have a friend who lived here for at least 20 years. He's older than me, maybe like 10, 15 years older than me. And he got by, but he never made a real living here. Ah, Yehuda. אתה אף פעם לא הולך הביתה? This is the contractor. אנחנו לומדים ליקוטי מוהרן. ליקוטי מוהרן. So my friend, he said, I'm going to America. His father was getting older. His father had like a little real estate business, He went and worked for his father. He'd come back like every 6 months, and then he started buying properties and renovating them and flipping them, and he became a multimillionaire. He stayed in America for many years, probably 10 years, and then eventually he moved back here. He never came back the same person. He's just simply not the same person. So I asked him, and he knows it as well, and he knows he can't seem to get it back. I asked him what happened, and he said, listen, my first year in America, I looked at all these people. He's a serious religious guy. So I looked at all the people in shul, and I'm like, you all are a bunch of fakes. I'm the real thing. I lived in Jerusalem. I'm the real thing. He said, but eventually you become one of them. And he said, it took me 2 years, and I completely forgot what it was to be a Jew in the land of Israel. I just became a Jew in the diaspora. I made my money. I came back, and I'm still a Jew in the diaspora, even though he's here in the land of Israel. And we've talked about it so many times. We end up sitting next to each other at weddings. That was, I guess, before Corona. Bezrat Hashem again soon. And just by chance, like, he would always be happy to see me. He's like, come sit with me. I got to talk with you. I got to share with you this pain that he has. So that's my practical analogy of example of what's going on when you're here and when you're not there. Now, we've talked about in the lesson, Eretz Ochelet Yoshvea, that's a land that consumes its inhabitants, and normally you think it's a bad thing. Rabbi Nachman says it's a good thing. You want to be consumed by the land. You want to be digested and integrated into the land of Israel and turned into what the land of Israel needs, but it only happens for somebody who wants it. And the same thing here. You don't merit the state of mind of the land of Israel unless you want it. The state of mind of the diaspora, I don't think you have to work for. It's just the default if you're going to have any state of mind. But here, you have to be aware of it. It probably also somewhat happens on its own, but you really have to work on it. And one of the things that Rabbi Nachman mentioned in the beginning is that, there's this strife outside of the land of Israel, but there's also strife within the land of Israel, which means that even though we have the merit of being in this special place where Hashem's energy is revealed in a different way than it is anywhere else in the world, we have to work on our connection with Hashem. We have to work on getting closer with Hashem all the time. Let me see where we are. Almost done. So it reminds me, just by the way, of Chaim Weizmann, who was, I think, was he the first president of the state of Israel? David, who listens to my class, he always sends me corrections, so he'll send me. And he'll also say, how can you not remember? Anyhow, he was one of the big Zionist founders in the pre-state days. And he was famous because he invented, I don't know if it was dynamite or something connected to dynamite. He was a famous chemist and a scientist. He was in England trying to get the British to allow the Jews to establish a state. And at one point he was asked, why there? Why the land of Israel? We can put you in Jordan. We can put you in Syria. We can put you, I don't know, in other places. And he said, listen, let's say you tell me that you have to visit your grandmother, but she lives far away. So I say to you, why go so far away? Right down the street, there's another grandmother. Go visit her. You'll tell me, but she's not my grandmother. And I'll tell you, and that's not my land. So I like that answer. That was a very clever answer. So this land is a unique place. It's a special place. Hashem designated it as a special place. The energy is here, but you have to work for it. There is a level of automatic, but it's just a default level. Okay, so we just skipped a little section, which I had planned on skipping, in order to finish in the next few minutes. Bezrat Hashem. ומחמת שמוחים של חוץ לארץ הם בחינת חובלים, and since the state of mind of the diaspora is one of strife, the chovlim זה לזה בהלכה, it clarifies, meaning that people are arguing about what the halacha means instead of working together to understand it. כי אינם יכולים להשוות דעתן יחד, because they're not able to bring their opinions together as mentioned above. כנ"ל. הם נופלים במוחים של חוץ לארץ שהם בחינת נועם. They fall into the state of mind of the land of Israel, and which is connected to pleasantness. And that I don't really understand. I just don't understand. But maybe we'll understand by the end here. כדי להתקן כנ"ל, in order to fix it as mentioned above. כי כן לפעמים שפוגמים הרבה, חס ושלום, because when a person damages their relationship with Hashem. God forbid, again and again. Azai einam yicholim lehitzaken adraba. They can't fix their relationship with Hashem, as mentioned above. So let's say a person decides they're going to now eat something not kosher, and it causes a blemish. You might feel like, nothing's going to change between my relationship with Hashem than before, but it causes a blemish. And it's very hard to fix that blemish. But if you do it again and again and again, then you can't fix the damage in the relationship. On the contrary, gomim pagam gam lemochin shel Eretz Yisrael. So you even cause a blemish in the state of mind of the land of Israel, which is where all of this is coming from, which is where our ability to see Hashem's presence in the world is coming from. V'azai gam hamochin shel Eretz Yisrael einam yicholim lahashvot atzman. And so even the state of mind in the land of Israel is not able to agree with itself, meaning that there's even strife within the land of Israel. Shenif gemu chas v'shalom, that causes damage, God forbid, al yedei hamochim shepegumim shel chutz la'aretz, that causes damage through the state of mind of the diaspora, shenaflu letocham kanal, which fell into the land of Israel, as mentioned above. So now I get it. V'zeh bechinat, and I'll explain in a second. V'zeh bechinat hamachloket sheyesh be'eretz Yisrael gam ken. So how come, he's saying, how come there's strife here in the land of Israel? Because the mentality of the diaspora is falling into the land of Israel. And then within the land of Israel, we're getting this strife which comes from outside the land of Israel. But if we're really connected only to the land of Israel, then there would never be any strife between the Jews here. That's what he's saying. Okay. Rabbi Nachman this is how he resolves the difficulty that he raised in the beginning, where he said there should be peace, but there's strife. So now a little summary of this, and then we have just one little paragraph left. We're going to finish on time. B'ezrat Hashem. Reb Nassan explains that this is relevant to all people, places, and times, whenever a person yearns to come closer to God and serve Him. But just to clarify, when it says Reb Nassan, so Reb Nassan wrote volumes and volumes of commentaries on Rabbi Nachman's teachings. Besides writing the actual teachings, after Rabbi Nachman passed away, Reb Nassan spent the rest of his life writing the whole Breslov library pretty much, explaining what Rabbi Nachman said. So, and Reb Nassan, he has a way of just giving you it in a straightforward way. So he says, what we just learned is relevant to everyone, whatever person, place, or time. Anyone who wants to come closer to Hashem. A person starts out with a burst of inspiration and a powerful desire to reveal Hashem's glory. And then the person feels that this inspiration, then at that time they feel like this inspiration is going to last forever. And nothing can prevent them from attaining the level of righteousness to which they aspire. A short time later, however, all this desire and yearning inexplicably disappears. The person's heart has lost their enthusiasm and their mind has become confused until they forget that they were ever inspired to serve Hashem in the first place. And this reversal is inevitable. Even when a person's awakening for God lasts for more than a few minutes, hours, or days, it is never permanent. In time, the enthusiasm which charged their devotions dissipates without a trace. Ibn Nassan writes that this is on account of the diaspora mentalities which fall into the mentalities of the land of Israel. All desire, and that's not to say something negative about people in the diaspora. It's to say that the diaspora itself has a flaw in connecting with Hashem on a spiritual level. And when this happens to a person here, since the state of mind of the land of Israel is always pure, then it's coming from the state of mind of as if you were in the diaspora. If you don't feel constantly connected with Hashem when you're in the land of Israel, it's because you created the type of disconnect that exists when you're not in the land of Israel. But if you're always connected to the mentality of the land of Israel, then you never have that. And he says, but it happens to all of us. And he's a great tzaddik. I don't know if Rabbi Nachman would say that about himself, that he had this disconnect. But Reb Nassan I mean, if there was ever a successor to Rabbi Nachman, it was Reb Nassim. So it comes about when the diaspora mentalities come into, like blend into the land of Israel mentalities. And all desire for closeness to God stems from the latter, the holy mentalities, meaning the closeness comes from the land of Israel state of mind. But as soon as a person feels inspired to serve Hashem, the diaspora state of mind, which stems from this blemishing of not seeing Hashem's presence in the world, are also awakened and seek to become a part of their devotions. If the person fails to fix them, that the person's vessel lacks wholeness, see the previous note, they blemish the land of Israel state of mind and their aspirations disappear. So he's making this kind of play. He's saying, when you're connected on the land of Israel. And when you have a disconnect, it's the disconnect that you get when you leave the land of Israel. And you don't even have to physically be outside of the land of Israel to have it. And I'm guessing that a person that's on a high enough spiritual level can be in the diaspora and have the level of the land of Israel mentality, state of mind. For sure, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. I mean, even you go by his kever now, his grave, you feel like you're in the land of Israel. I feel it every time I'm there. This same feeling that I can feel now in my mind and my heart when I'm in Jerusalem, I feel it when I'm right next to the grave of the Lubavitcher Rebbe's. There's two of them. They're both great tzaddikim. Every Rebbe that I went to on my trip to Ukraine, everyone had a different energy. The Baal Shem Tov had a loving energy. Rabbi Nachman had a grounding energy. Who else can I remember? Reb Nassim was really interesting. I felt like he was finally resting. Like this was a person who had worked and worked and worked and worked and worked, and now he rested. It was kind of like the 5 days of rest that I had in Corona. Did I tell you, by the way, I got my Corona certificate, I got my green pass. Yeah, I'm a kosher yid for 6 months. I won't get another one. They'll never give one of those to me again. Okay, so the person forgets everything as if they never yearned to serve God. And so a person must always guard his memory. I interpret that sentence that a person has to always guard their memory means that a person has to be vigilant and constantly be working on their relationship with Hashem. You can never take it for granted. The person has to remind themselves of all the earlier times when they were inspired, of every desire and yearning for God in which they felt in times of the past. And doing so enables the person to draw from the impression, the reshimu, that's left from earlier revelations of the land of Israel mentalities which he experienced. This in turn will give the person the determination and strength to reawaken their desire for closeness to God and for serving Hashem. Reb Nassim explains that the chovlim, the damagers, are the main source of all the obstacles people must overcome in order to perform a mitzvah. And what that means, and all the hardships they suffer in order to come closer to God, meaning that if all the gates were open to you and you said, wow, now I really want to do a mitzvah with my whole heart, and there were no obstacles, then we'd all be tzaddikim and there'd be no purpose for us to exist. Hashem is always putting obstacles in the way. Obstacles in your mind, obstacles physically. What was it? Last Friday afternoon, just before Shabbos, I was trying to get to shul. I'm running the shul for the next 2 weeks. Trying to get to shul on time, and everything went wrong. Even the nose pad on my glasses fell off when I was in the bathroom. And I was running so late. It was like Hashem was torturing me. Everything was going wrong, but I got to shul on time, found the hot plate, so that was also missing. Somebody had put it in the craziest place behind the refrigerator. That's what Hashem does. You would think, here, I'm running to shul. I want to serve you, Hashem. I'm opening the shul for hundreds of people to come and daven. And what are you doing? Torturing me. But that's how we grow stronger. As an example, Reb Nassim brings the pilgrimage to the Holy Land. One of 3 things that are achieved only through suffering. And you would think that's a terrible thing. Why would I want to suffer? I'll just stay away. I don't want to go to the land of Israel. So let me tell you, a person that wants to be healthy and be in good shape also has to suffer. And how many people do we see running? How many secular people do I see running on Shabbos? Running. They want to suffer in order to grow. I'm willing to suffer in order to grow spiritually, also physically. But that's what he's talking about. It's not suffering in a bad way, it's suffering in a good way. When a person yearns to tread upon the soil of the Holy Land, they receive an influx of supernal pleasantness, the mentalities of the land of Israel. But immediately the damagers fall into the pleasantness, meaning the mentality of the diaspora comes into the mentality of the land of Israel in search of rectification. These diaspora states of mind, promoters of discord, conjure up seemingly insurmountable obstacles making the journey. A person then must be very determined in order to defeat them and overcome the hardships and achieve their goal. The greatest obstacles, Reb Nassan adds, are the ones created in the mind, and that we've talked about before. For the truth is that anything a person genuinely desires to accomplish, they accomplish. The main thing holding them back is that they do not yet absolutely believe that they must accomplish it, and that their soul's well-being depends on absolutely doing this. Therefore, if a person believed in the holiness of the Holy Land unconditionally, nothing in the world could keep the person from traveling there. Okay. So that's it. We're just going to read the last line here. Ashrei shezoche lehargish ni'imut haTorah. Blessed is somebody who merits to feel the pleasantness of the Torah. And for somebody who grew up in a harsh religious home, and I know so many people like that, it's really Ashrei shezoche lehargish ni'imut haTorah. Blessed are those who merit to feel the pleasantness of the Torah. Ki yesh ni'imut b'Torah, because there is pleasantness in the Torah. V'zeu yikar, and this is the main thing. Liskot lehargish hani'imut sheyesh b'Torah, to merit to feel the pleasantness in the Torah. Having linked most of the major topics in the lesson, the mentalities, God's glory, begetting offspring, charity, and song, with supernal pleasantness, Rabbi Nachman closes by stating that the main thing is sensing the pleasantness in the Torah. In a sense, this point encapsulates all that preceded it, because the Torah can be linked to each of the topics. And the last sentence here, Darchecha darchei noam, her ways are ways of pleasantness, v'chol netivotea shalom, and all of her paths lead to peace. So the last, there is an addendum here, but we don't have time for it. In Likutey Atzot, Reb Nassan writes, there is pleasantness in the Torah. The main thing is to be worthy of tasting this pleasantness and sweetness. A person can achieve this by rectifying, by fixing the blemish of glory, meaning by fixing their relationship with Hashem and seeing Hashem's presence in the world, and never taking any credit for themselves. That's the easiest thing to do. Anyone says to you, "Oh, you make such great food," you say Baruch Hashem. That's the easy way of giving Hashem credit all the time. People come to me and say, "I love the davening Friday night, Baruch Hashem." If you say, "Yeah, I'm an awesome," I can't even say the words, "I'm awesome at leading the davening," no one will ever come again to lead the davening. And no one will get to hear you lead the davening. But giving all the credit to God alone. Also by giving charity, especially since tzedakah, and especially tzedakah for the causes of the land of Israel, can draw from the state of mind of the land of Israel and thereby taste the pleasantness of the Torah. These two guys, Rabbi Nachman and Reb Nassan, I mean, could you find this anywhere else in the world? Stuff like this, it's just incredible. Really, Ashreinu, that we get to learn from the Torah of Rabbi Nachman. Really, kiss it again. Okay, so a long story I'm going to make short. Lately in Living Jewish, for those who want to see, Living Jewish, I don't know if it's backwards there, it's backwards for me. They've been putting these My Encounter with the Rebbe. So for many years now, 10 years or longer, Chabad has a team that goes around and records people's stories, like exceptional stories of them meeting with the Rebbe. So this is a story from Miss Leah Englander, who lives in Long Island. And this is recorded in 2014. So she's a Baalat Tshuva, and she became a Baalat Tshuva. Basically, she would see Hasidic people in Long Island when she was growing up, and she always admired the families and the Shabbos that she would see. And so at some point she decided to start keeping kosher and light candles, but she wasn't ready to commit to becoming observant. And then her brother and her sister-in-law, they became Chabadnikim, And that inspired her to come closer to Chabad. And eventually, she went to the Rebbe for dollars and got a blessing. And the Rebbe blessed her that she should always have tremendous nachas from her children. And she had 3 children and had nachas from them, of course. And one of them, her middle son, Yehuda Leib, when he was 1 year old, he started having seizures. And one night, she went into his room and she sensed that something was wrong. She saw that he was completely blue. He could barely breathe. And she and her husband took him outside, and it was cold at that time of the year. And hoping the cold weather would wake him up, but it didn't wake him up. They called an ambulance. They brought him into the hospital. And the doctors talked about, in a matter-of-fact way, her son's paralysis. And she said, "What do you mean paralysis? My son has epilepsy, but he's not paralyzed." And the doctor said, "What do you mean? Half of his body is paralyzed." And they showed me that his eye was drooping and his lip, and they picked up his hand and it just fell down. They said, "He's paralyzed. Half of his body is paralyzed." So she called her brother and told him what was going on. And he said, "I'll take care of it." So, of course, that comforted her a little bit. She didn't know at the time that it wasn't so easy to get a hold of the Rebbe because it was 10:30 on Motzei Shabbos, 10:30 p.m. on Motzei Shabbos. And the Rebbe was already at home. And the Rebbe had called all the secretaries and nobody could get through. And he didn't want to go to the Rebbe's house, but she was worried. And the mother asked, "What are my son's chances of recovering?" And they said, "Well, with this type of paralysis, he may get some degree of movement, but he'll never be normal again." And so she thought, okay, I'm going to have to get in a wheelchair and build a ramp, and this is going to be my life now, taking care of this paralyzed son. And she called back her brother and said, "Any news from the Rebbe?" And he said, I'm doing my best. Now, getting to the Rebbe's house, there were always yeshiva bachrim that were standing at night guarding the Rebbe's house, keeping people away from the house. So he knew this, so he went with a friend, sent his friend to the front door. These guys came over to talk with him, and he went around and went over to the front door. He rings the bell, and his heart started beating. The lights turned on in the house. He realized what a chutzpah it is. And the Rebbe's wife, the Rebbetzin, opens the door. The Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka, which is why everybody's named Chaya Mushka in Chabad. And he was so nervous, he couldn't speak. So she said to him, "Please, come in. How can I help you?" Like, everything's normal. So it's just like, she didn't even know that people were guarding the house. It's like, "Oh, somebody's at the door. Come on in. How can I help you?" And he says about his sister's son, and she's saying, ugh, with everything. He's like, everything explained. She's like, this is terrible. She said, "Okay, give me your sister's son's name, and your sister's name, and I'll tell my husband." And so the woman who's telling the story, she said, "I don't know exactly when the Rebbe gave the blessing, but the Rebbe's secretary called back her brother in the morning to say that the Rebbe had given the blessing. And around 1:20 in the morning, her son suddenly started moving again. And the doctor who was standing there seeing this said, "I don't believe it. I don't believe it." He was like screaming, "I don't believe it." He said, "Your son just completely recovered." And there were other specialists there, and he brought them over, and they couldn't believe that he was moving. On the paralyzed side of his body, he was moving. So she said, I told the pediatrician who was Jewish that it was because of a blessing from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And he said, "Well, you're probably right, because we've never seen anything like this before." And after that, a few months later, she had to bring her son in for a checkup every few months. And he loved to go because he would come running in and jump on the table and watch how the shock doctors couldn't believe that he had a full recovery. So, what were we talking about before? The emunah and tzaddikim, having trust in tzaddikim. That we daven to Hashem, but we have trust in tzaddikim. And it's easier, to be honest, it's easier to trust a tzaddik than to daven to Hashem. Because when you go to a true tzaddik, there's many people that people call tzaddikim. but I don't know if they're really a true tzaddik or not. But the Lubavitcher Rebbe, there's no question. I mean, there's story after story after story. There's videos, there's actual videos of people going to the Rebbe, and you can see, like that one I told last week about the shoe being thrown at the Rebbe's picture. These things are recorded. They're not just somebody making them up. When you have emunah in the tzaddik, it's helping you in your emunah with Hashem. That's the point of it. And you also have to have emunah in the land of Israel. A lot of times Rabbi Nachman compares the tzaddik and the land of Israel as if they're equivalent. And I think that's why when you stand by the Lubavitcher Rebbe's grave in New York, you feel the land of Israel, because they were like a living land of Israel. Okay, so Yasher Koach Aryeh, and Yasher Koach to everybody who is with us. I see that Sarah was watching and Fega Chaya. So next week, the same time, same phone, same stand, possibly a different volume of Likutey Moharan at my mother's house. It's going to be very interesting. And let's say a little nigun before we end. What a crazy world this is. Is coming. Gotta get ready. Shakoach. It's Shabbos.